All right, now I can share my screen. Dun. All right, so we're gonna get started with the story of the boat for our sustainable economy mini-series. In the 19th century, working on a merchant ship was pretty dangerous business. Um, Successive governments and greedy ship owners did little to protect the lives of the seamen. Merchant ships brought in so much money for their owners, but they faced a lot of risk on the open sea. I mean, imagine being on a ship like this out in the middle of the ocean in the 1800s. I mean, you could just get lost if it's a cloudy day, you can't see the stars. You're you're done, right? You could be attacked by pirates. You get caught in a storm. You could hit a rock or a reef or something, and just destroy the bottom of your wooden ship, and you'd sink right there. And so these ship owners, they were notorious for their greed, and they just thought about profit before all else. So whether they owned one ship or a fleet of ships, there were only two ways to make more money with the ships they had. It was either sail faster or carry more cargo than others, and that would increase their profit margins. Sailing faster meant that they could gain an advantage on other ships in the business because they could deliver quicker. And carrying more weight, I mean, it's just a lower per pound cost for sailing the ship, or per ton. So if they overload their ships, they reduce their per ton cost of a shipment, make a higher profit. The risks involved with having a heavier ship is that it was more likely to sink because it was lower in the water. And so, I mean, you can see a ship that's been loaded heavily down. The the freeboard, it's called, or the part of the boat that's above the water. Obviously, this one has zero freeboard, but on these ships over here, oh wait, on these ships over here, you can see this is the freeboard. It's called. So the part of the boat that's above the water is called freeboard. So these boats have freeboard. If the more you overload your boat, the less freeboard you have, and the closer the water line is to the deck, to the edge of the boat. So that gets risky. But as long as ship owners had insurance, if any of those risks became a reality for their owners and the boat sank, they'd be reimbursed and would just buy a new ship. And again, an overloaded ship, you know, because it's lower, it is also more likely to hit a rock or hit a reef or something underwater because it goes deeper into the water. So, what were the consequences of a boat like this sinking? The cargo on that boat sunk to the bottom of the ocean. The sailors perished, but they got the families probably got a small stipend or something for the loss of their husband or whoever was on the ship. And again, the ship owner didn't really suffer because usually he also had other ships as well. So it wasn't a big deal. Now, in the year 1876, the British Board of Trade recorded that 856 British merchant ships were lost within 10 miles of British coast. Now you think, man, that had to be a really stormy year. There were probably hurricanes or tropical storms or something riling up the coastline so that all this many ships sank. The conditions were no worse than a strong breeze, is what was recorded. So, how did so many ships sink? Like, what was going on? Were they really that overburdened that they got 10 miles and just kerplump? Like, that seems ridiculous, right? And so, within 10 miles of the coast, there's some pretty dense shipping traffic in the 1870s. So, those shipwrecks began to have a marginal social cost. That is, wait, a marginal social cost is a cost or benefit that is borne by third parties who have no direct association with the purchase or sale of product or service. Another word for it is an externality. So if you're talking to others, I would probably use the word externality. So there's negative and positive externalities. So for example, a negative externality is that, someone is, working on a road. Oh no, I benefit from a road. Let's see. Someone is building a new house, and the whole time there's construction, they leave all the construction materials across the sidewalk. I don't benefit from a new house. I'm not affected by the old house, but I am affected by them leaving their materials in the sidewalk because I can't walk past. Now, a positive externality would be something where someone else does something that's for themselves, but it ends up helping me. So, for example, I don't know, an ice cream truck crashes in an intersection, and they start giving away they just like get rid of all the ice cream so it doesn't melt and they lose the product, and then I get free ice cream. That will be a great externality to come out of a car crash. I like the idea. Now I want ice cream. Excuse me. So back to our ship. So these cargo ships are all sunk 10 miles of the shore. And there's going to be dense shipping traffic in the 1870s. If there were 856 ships that sunk in that range within a year, there's got to be thousands of ships going in and out of the British harbors every day, or throughout the year. So how can these ships navigate around so many shipwrecks, especially when they are also overloaded as well as just like the ones that wrecked? I mean, the traffic stops at that point because you can't safely navigate your own harbors. So in this case, the marginal social cost of the sunken ships was that they became traps for other ships approaching the harbors and became unsafe for them to navigate their own harbors. So, in comes Samuel Plimsoll. He was a working class character from Redcliffe, England. Oh, that's an interesting sound. He understood the struggles of the poor because of his background. He'd worked in a lot of different industries, mining coal to working on ships himself. And oh, excuse me, could you please mute your microphone if you got that really fun, funky music in the background? Thank you. So Samuel began to speak up about the conditions of these boats and began calling overloaded and unseaworthy merchant ships coffin ships. And in 1868, he was elected to Parliament, and so he actually was taken seriously for the work that, for all the crazy stuff he was saying, instead of just being the guy on the street corner yelling for, shipping reform and about these coffin ships. He was actually a parliamentarian. He was, a leader, a politician. And so he pushed and he pushed for reform. But the ship owners were awful. They obviously hated this idea that someone was going to ruin their profits by imposing some sort of regulation on how much they could load their ships. That was a terrible idea for them. So they hit him with lawsuits, and it took about 8 more years before that bill was put into action. The Unseaworthy Ships Bill in 1876, which was later rolled into the Merchant Shipping Act of like 1893, I think it was. So Parliament ended up having to pass this Unseaworthy Ships Bill because public opinion was so strong in favor of it. Because so many people were losing, family members to shipwrecks. So this act required that all ships that entered British harbors bear a marking on the hull to make sure they weren't overloaded. So when that line disappears below the water line, it's overloaded. And so that line became known as the Plimsoll mark and is found midship on both the port and starboard sides of cargo vessels and is now used worldwide because, I mean, Great Britain was still the largest global market at the time in the 1800s. So other countries eventually had to come into conformity to maintain their business. Now, this is what the line looks like close up. So you can see the change of color on the hull. Wait, where's my pointer? You can see the change of color on the hull from red to black and then gray. So this is something that from far away from the boat, it's super easy to see where that line is. Oops. Alvaro recognized that picture. So it's a reference mark on the hull that indicates the maximum depth to which the cargo can be safely immersed when loaded with cargo, or the vessel can be safely immersed when loaded with cargo. Now these different lines, because it's not an easy thing to read, it's not super clear, you just see the red line, right? So that depth varies slightly with the ship's dimension, the type of cargo, time of year, and water densities, because, you know, there's different, things float better in salt water because it is more dense. And so even though you're pretty dense, the water is denser, so you float better in salt water. So these different letters indicate tropical waters, summer versus winter. Um, you know, this I think it's WSA is winter in the South Atlantic. Winter in the North Atlantic is different because as the water gets colder, it's going to, be change the density of the water as well. Now this circle with the line through it, that's so you can make sure that the ship is loaded evenly so that the bow and stern of the boat are equally low in the water so that you're not, really low in the back and not so much in the front because that again could get you caught on a rock. So if you look at, this is the Bay of Valparaiso. This is in Chile. It was the main port of the country up to like I think 1914. So basically when or later. And so you can see these boats in the harbor that when I lived in the city, I lived there for almost about 8 months to a year, I think it was, on a study abroad. Every day you'd see boats coming in and out of this port. And the port activity over here, I mean, it was just insane to me living in the middle of a country, having never seen cargo in that amount. I mean, we have freight trains, but nothing like this. And so seeing these boats come in and out and seeing just how much of commerce arrived by boat was really incredible for me. And so I remember seeing these ships all with that line down the middle. And I'm like, who does this paint job? And why do they insist on having two colors on a boat? Like, that seems really odd and, you know, unnecessary, right? And then I started to notice that when the ships were empty and waiting to be filled in the harbor, they were higher and you saw more of that second color. And then the ones that were loaded, you sometimes only saw that first color or like just a sliver of the second color. And that's because when they were unloaded, they floated higher, and when they were loaded down, they sunk deeper to that Plimsoll line. So this line keeps ships from exceeding their carrying capacity. It serves as a tool to prevent overloading, which causes that marginal social cost or costs that are borne onto others. But what other industries have carrying capacities per se? So in the US at least, the fire department will come into buildings and establish a maximum occupancy. And so that's the maximum number of people that can safely be in a room or be in a building so that in the case of a fire, they can safely exit. So that's the carrying capacity of that building. Now, in nature, we see population size often has a carrying capacity. So if you know of any animals like rabbits or deer or, I think the classic example is the rabbits and lynx, where you see that predator-prey relationship, and when there aren't enough predators, the prey, or the small animal that reproduces really quickly, shoots up in population very quickly, exponentially over time.
Yeah.
But they reach a point where they're over capacity, where um, they just can't.
They do like environmental issue when you have overcapacity of a population of an species then lose the equilibrium. I think that is the
Yes,
problem.
exactly. So a habitat can only maintain a certain number of animals. I mean, if they're all eating the same food and they're only in, 1 hectare of a forest, there's only so much food available. And so they'll increase to a point that there's no more food available, or they begin to spread disease that is related to the density of their population because they're all sleeping so cramped together all the time. They're traveling in such big packs. Disease just rips through them. And so that's their carrying capacity. So, do you know of anything else that has a carrying capacity? Is there something else that, if it reaches a certain point, it collapses?
Yeah. At least in Chile, we have a big problem with beavers because
Beavers.
yeah, they are not naturals from Chile. They are from the U.S. Some people think that was a good idea carrying a little amount of beavers to Chile. I think 50. They came here with 50 beavers for trying to work with. They sell the skin of beavers, so they try to start a little place to have
Big
beavers.
farm.
So they are not naturals from here. So in Chile, they don't have any natural predators. So
Yep.
um,
And
we
so they
have
see the carrying.
the south part of Chile have the capacity to have 5,000 beavers because we have forests there and they could live there like 5,000 beavers. We have 2 million beavers now.
Yeah.
And the most
So
ecological
do you
thing to
see
do
that
is
cost?
kill the beavers.
Yeah.
So that's a big problem.
Hmm. Anyone else see issues of carrying capacity in their communities? Something that's not an animal. So I gave 3 examples: the shipping industry, animals that don't have a predator, and what was the third one I said? Oh, like carrying capacity in buildings or occupancy, for fire risk.
I
Right.
think you have planes too. I report like the problem with too many planes in one airport.
Right. Too many planes in the airport, they're gonna crash.
Yeah.
Well, what about, wait, we'll go back to it. Economic growth. So we know that we live on a planet it's just one planet, and while there's talk of going to other planets and exploring other planets and living on other planets, planet Earth's really the only one we've got that can sustain life, right? We're all in agreement there. Any let's go to the moon, Earth. You're welcome to speak up, but Earth's the one with the atmosphere, Earth's the one with water, it's got the correct living conditions for us. Earth is really unique. And our it has finite resources, right? Because it's only what's in the confines of our atmosphere. We can only drill so deep. There's only so much iron. There's only so much, water. Only so much copper and other resources on our Earth, right? Um, you all maybe have studied about carbon cycles or phosphorus cycles or different nutrient cycles. And the fact of the matter is, whether it's in the atmosphere, the biosphere, so like in plants and animals and humans, um, in the soil, in the lithosphere, or in the hydrosphere in the water. Those are the four options. That's the only spot it can be. And so the same, we're using that same water that the dinosaurs drank. It's the same water this whole time. And so we have to understand that when we use resources, there's an end to it, there's a cap on it. We can only use so much. So many economies push for growth, right? I know the US economy is always talking about our growth, our GDP growth, our inflation rate, things like that. How much did our GDP grow, or gross domestic product? How much did that grow from January 1st to December 31st? In 1 year, how much did it grow? And that's a measure of economic prosperity, right? In all of our countries, the idea is for your economy to grow. You don't want it to shrink. If it shrinks, then that's called a recession or depression. And then there's problems because people are out of work, people are losing their job, people are in financial stress. So we come to this concept of a finite planet, but infinite economic growth. And I could not find good pictures of economic growth. So I just have a couple quotes from newspaper articles and Freakonomics and Forbes and this blogger, Mrs. Christ, all talk about what economic growth looks like on a finite planet with finite resources. How can we grow forever? Because we and it's not just like we're going to run out of resources. It's that the marginal social cost of using these resources exceeds the benefit as well. So it's both about marginal costs and actual accessibility of those resources. So yeah, maybe we're gonna run out of oil in 50 years, but in 12 years, we'll have polluted too much to ever return to this climatic condition, and it will continue to grow hotter, and we can't reverse that. So we can't keep burning fossil fuels until we run out. We have to stop before that to avoid those marginal costs. Now, the way to measure the impact of a population, so we go back to our carrying capacity. How do you get to this carrying capacity? What determines when you hit it? It's population, so the number of people in an area. It's affluence, or the level of resource consumption, typically measured by GDP per capita. And then technology, which is the efficiency of consumption. So greenhouse gas emissions over GDP over GDP. So if you live in an area where there's 10,000 people, but they're really efficient about their resource use, and they've got a medium level of consumption, they I think let's say 10,000 US dollars is the GDP per capita. So just under the level to be part of ODAC, or considered a first world country or developed country. They probably have a pretty low impact because they're really efficient about their energy use. Now, if you had 1,000 people that were making $50,000 per capita, which is the average level of consumption in the US, our technology is not advanced enough to have that efficiency of consumption in the US. Not everyone's driving electric cars. There's still cars without catalytic converters or ways of regulating their emissions when they drive. So we're going to have a very high impact. And so even though there's fewer people, there's other factors that influence our impact on the environment. So with that carrying capacity, our carrying capacity is increased or decreased based on the technology and affluence of that community. Does anyone have questions on that? And I can't read the chat, so if someone reads it, types it in the chat, read it out loud as well. All right, where's my sheet? Okay, so here's a map of GDP per capita across the world. So, Europe and Saudi Arabia or Dubai or something like that, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, US, and Canada are over $30,000 in GDP per capita. Other countries are lower. So here's the scale. And this is, I believe, in US dollars, but there's no unit. So it's going to be either US dollars or euros. And either makes sense. And I also don't know the date on this map, so I apologize if it's not totally correct. So we see this resource consumption, and even though China and India have the highest population in the world, over 1 billion each, what is their impact relative to the US or Canada or the European Union, who together they probably have 1 billion between the EU, Canada, and the US. I mean, the US is only 330 million people. So how do they compare with one of these countries who is having a higher impact? And so we're seeing just in the past 4 years, maybe, that China has beat out the US in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. But that was just recently, and they've been way above our population size. So that's a good way to think about by looking at GDP per capita times population times greenhouse gas emissions, and you'll see who's having a higher impact over others. And that, so when the US has that higher impact, or when China, grows their population bigger than others, I keep doing that, I'm sorry. When China grows their population over others, it creates that marginal cost on others. So it's affecting others. People are losing money, people are losing jobs, people are getting sick because of the climate impacts that are happening from their carbon emissions. And it's not the people in, North or South Korea's fault when the wind pushes emissions across the North China Sea to them. It's not their fault, but they are marginally affected by it. So, are we a sinking ship? Is our economy a sinking ship because we don't have this Plimsoll line? Is there a way to put a Plimsoll line on our economy so that it knows what our capacity is, what that carrying capacity is, what that limit is, before we're overloading our economy with resource consumption, with people with affluence? What do you guys think? I'm going to put you in breakout rooms. So breakout rooms is a new feature that we just added to our account, and I'm going to put you in groups of 2. Yep. I'm going to put you in groups of 2, and you'll get to talk with someone else in the group for just maybe 3 minutes will do, about what's going on in our economy, and tell me, are we on a sinking ship right now? And yeah, those are the 2 questions you can ask. Are we on a sinking ship? And what is a sort of Plimsoll line that we can put on our economy? All right. So it's going to give you an option to join breakout room and hit join. All right, if you don't move, I'm going to move you. Oh, I can't move you. Alvaro, Mohammed, Prashan, and there we go. Mohammed and Prashan, hit join.
I need my passport number.
Oh. Breakout rooms. All right, everyone's come back now.
Where is the other people? We have 3 and we
They're
were
coming back
7.
to your breakout session.
Ah, okay. Cool. Cool, 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 cool.
Allegedly. They kicked out in 60 seconds. So
Ah, that is cool.
we had good conversations.
So I will apply for the master in Spain.
Excellent. All right. People come back. Mohammed, what'd you think? Did you like the breakout session?
Yeah, actually, it's amazing and educative.
Yeah, I think that was really cool. All right. Thanks everyone for coming back. Oh, we got a couple people coming back. I'm glad you liked the breakout session. You're welcome to type in the chat your thoughts on it and if you think we should include these in future calls. Obviously, I can't, say we'll use them in all calls, but it's definitely a feature that the facilitator can use. Right, is everyone back? No, I'm still missing 2, it looks like.
Yeah? I think
Unless
you
they
are
just dropped off the
like
call.
7.
Let's see, breakout rooms, anyone in there still? Okay. All right, so back to the presentation. Are we on a sinking ship? What did everyone come up with? Are we?
I think not, but we are almost there. So we need to change the consumption levels to not put more charge in that chip.
What about the Plimsoll line on our economy? Where is it?
I think we are in the mark, in the TCW mark.
Where are we?
We are here. No, here in the T. Now upper T there.
There. Okay, so we're
I
right
think we're there, like right in the line. So we need to increase the level of consumption of the countries because we have too many consumption that is not useful, then it's a stupid consumption, like the fast fashion, for example. Like I read an article the other day that too many people use the clothes less than 10 times, like because it's going out of fashion, or they don't want to be with the same clothes, like with the same outfit 2 times in a month. That is stupid, at least for me. So we need to increase that kind of situations, the customs that are affecting the consumption levels.
Thanks, Alvaro. Who else? What'd you guys come up with in your group? Well, I was in Alvaro's group, so that was. All right, I can hear you. Go on. Hello? You still there? You still talking?
Sí. I don't know. I don't know. I say this sector. Let me get them. Let me get them.
All right. So, plumb some line on our economy. How do we fix it? So, we saw the impact.
Hello.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, this Isaac. The other breakup point group. Actually, we think we are is it the ZW mark? Yeah. Uh,
Which,
as my the ZW
okay.
probably the yep yep. And then I think more can be done about our consumption levels. And then with the rate in which the population is increasing with regards to Africa, I think something can be done to at least the economy of Africa can increase, and then um, we can move above the mark. Sorry, yeah.
Right, because we also don't want to say, oh, well, the developed countries who already have a high level of affluence and so have a high level impact, since they're already increasing they're at the carrying capacity. So here, where it's red and yellow, they should be allowed to consume more. That's not the answer. The answer isn't to say, oh, well, we're at our carrying capacity, so sorry, guys. The answer is reducing consumption here, 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 and here so that everyone can develop and have the same resource allocation to have their needs fulfilled, but at that limit, below that limit. So
Okay.
there are a couple ways to do that. First is decoupling growth from resources. I think I spelled resource wrong. This is something that has been talked about in Chile's plan for addressing the Paris Agreement. I know, because that's the only one I've read in full, actually. Sorry. Um, and so right now, we can measure GDP per capita as a measure of affluence and resource consumption because the trend is as you increase in economic standing, financial standing, you use more resources. As you get a better pay or, the economy is growing in your country, you're going to, get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 TVs in your house instead of the one you had. You're going to get more computers, more stuff, more clothes, a second, a car, a second car, a third car. And it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And your consumption, your resource use is growing and growing and growing as the economy grows. Now, you can decouple that. So, like a train, where you decouple a car from that train, it doesn't have to be correlated. And so the idea is that Chile is laid out is that if they can access the right resources, as their economy grows, they don't have to keep cutting down trees. They don't have to keep mining for different resources. They don't have to keep importing liquid natural gas through pipelines and on boats. Um, they can use wind power, they can use solar power, and they can increase their energy consumption level. They can increase their the amount of energy that they produce or consume in a year without having to purchase more resources that are finite from the ground. They can use wind power and they can use solar power, and that's what they've done. So they're decoupling growth of their economy from um, you know non-renewable energy sources, so fossil fuels. So that's one way to address it, is to change the technology, so be more efficient in your consumption. That's decoupling. Next is to internalize the externalities and correct for those negative externalities with that marginal social cost. So once you take into effect the marginal social cost, if you make the person who's causing it pay for it, so the whole polluter pays principle, where you cause this effect, you got to clean it up, you caused that ship to wreck, or it's your ship that wrecked, you have to pull it out of the water. Basically, you can't leave it in the harbor where it's going to cause more ships to sink. That's internalizing those externalities. So that's going to affect affluence because people are going to pay for their impacts, and so they're going to reduce their impacts, or they're going to reduce their consumption of resources that cause an additional cost. So just like if you've ever seen the scale, it looks a lot like this of, cost and, um, propensity to buy, I think it is. Oh, price and quantity. So as price goes up, people buy fewer. This isn't right. Wait. So low price, people buy low price, people buy a lot. High price, people buy a little. Here are the social costs. So once you move that, you find a new, so here's the market equilibrium, but the social optimum is a higher price and fewer people buying, but there isn't that pollution of dead weight. So here we're also going to look at ecosystem services. So there are, when you affect green space, when you affect the environment, that environment was providing a service to us. So nature provides flood control, erosion control. It regulates temperatures. It produces oxygen. It sucks. It's a sink for, like in a forest, for example. It's a sink for carbon. So when we pollute, that carbon can be absorbed by the trees. But right now, I would argue that we are above the Plimsoll line because we're producing more carbon emissions than are going back into sinks. So if we were at equilibrium, I think that my argument would be that the trees would be able to absorb, or the trees, the atmosphere, the oceans will be absorbing all the carbon emissions that we produce. We're past that point. We have a net, there's a net carbon that is being emitted into the atmosphere and there's nowhere else to go. The ocean's super saturated with carbon. So I'd say we're above that line. So if we start to internalize those costs so that we understand the value of these ecosystem services, then we start to see that, okay, when we have green space, it saves us $1 billion annually in flood control. So we should keep those wetlands. And if we get rid of those wetlands, it's going to cause, $1 billion annually in flood control costs. We're going to have erosion problems. We're not going to have clean water. The flooding is going to cause, people to go homeless. We're going to need disaster shelters. We're going to need all sorts of emergency relief in the case of flooding that could have been mitigated by having proper wetlands. Now, people think, well, that's a hypothetical. This last year in Houston, Texas, in the U.S., they were hit by a hurricane, and scientists believe that if they had not developed their tallgrass prairie ecosystem and their wetlands, the cost would have been greatly reduced. They would not have had the level of flooding, the level of damage that they end up having. Same thing with areas that get rid of their mangroves. Mangroves provide storm surge protection because they block the waves from hitting the coastline and just eroding it away, from washing over the land and flooding it. They can protect the shoreline. When you get rid of those and build right up to the waterfront because you want to have that beachside resort, you're losing that ecosystem service and something is missing. So how do we internalize it? We build stormwater management bioswales. We create those wetlands. We create ecosystems that can absorb water. We become self-sufficient. So this is an example of water recycling machinery within a building. So they recycle all their resources. They collect rainwater and they cycle that into gray water, for your toilets or to the plants that they have outside. They recycle gray water. I'm sorry, the they recycle gray water as well. So from your sink, it goes to the toilet so that it gets a second use. And then all that water is stored on site. None of the water runs off into storm sewers or drainage that goes into the city and cause problems down the line or down the river, because everything that happens upstream affects what's downstream of it. But if it never goes into the stream, it doesn't have that effect, doesn't have that externality. So one thing that's been developed in the I don't know how long ago, in the last 10 to 20 years probably, is this idea of LEED design. So leadership in engineering and environmental design, it's called. And so it's regulated by the United States Green Building Council, and they help design buildings. So work with architects, design buildings that treat all their water on site, that have their own energy production. They have solar panels. They have green roofs. They have stormwater catchment. They have all these different things that reduce their impact, reduce their externalities. Economic degrowth is that was reducing affluence. And then the last one is economic degrowth, which says that while human development and prosperity require resource use, overuse of the resources in the legacy economy has already led to the breaching of planetary boundaries. So that's saying we are over the Plimsoll line. We are past it. So the overuse of resources has created conditions of unsustainability, and so we need to cut back. We need to shrink our economy. That's, again, tricky because it's going to mean recession. It means countries can't develop. It means that people are going to lose money, lose jobs, lose their homes, and put people into a crisis. Now, that's a pretty hard sell when people don't want to engage in sustainability already, and now we're going to say we need you to engage in sustainability and you're going to lose your house in the process. No one wants that. So it's an ethical quandary of how we can degrow our economy. And so decoupling is probably our best bet. And then the other issue to address is population size. So how we can degrow our economy is reducing our population. And that, again, is an ethical quandary, because how can you say how many babies a family can have, how many new people can be brought into this world? Oh, do we just start killing off old people so that we have more space for new growth? No, none of that. But we can recommend or incentivize to a degree having only the replacement rate. So two people have one baby, that would be reducing the size of the population. Two people have two babies, that's maintaining the status quo. So if two people have two babies, that means there's going to be two new people that can have one baby per person, basically.
But sorry, a question
Yes?
about that. But you're talking about like control of population. So that is complicated because
Oh yeah,
against the freedom of the people too.
right.
So some people maybe want like 10 kids or 12 or I don't know. So I think it's complicated when we think in that kind of cases, because in the past people or countries that control the population, this is always against the women's, because for example, countries that have these political issues.
Poor people, they sterilize poor people and say you're not allowed to have kids because you can't afford to keep them. And we have to reduce the population somehow, so we're going to stick you with a needle, we're going to force you to undergo abortions, whatever it is. And that
You have selective abortions that select men's about women's. So
right, in China they're suffering now because their population is so dominantly male, because people selected to have a male child over a female child. And so if they got, a female child first, they get rid of it. And that was an example, in China was an example of unethical population control because it was strictly enforced. They forced abortions, they forced infanticide to maintain that population level. I would never advocate for that. I would only say that either as a personal choice, we can decide to limit our own impact by not having more than 2 children, or adopting children. There are so many kids that don't have families that if you can adopt instead, and this is again personal opinion, it's up to you to decide what's best for you and your family.
Yeah.
When it comes time to have kids, like I'm not gonna shame anyone with kids and say, how dare you impact our environment like that by having 3 kids. No, never. But it's something to consider as a personal choice, just like becoming vegetarian or becoming vegan. That's a way that you can decrease the affluence impact on the environment. So you're consuming less resources by eating vegetarian, by eating vegan. But, that's not for everyone. And so we're not going to mandate it, but at government functions, at Care About Climate functions, things like that, it should be required that only vegetarian or vegan meals are served. So that's an example of how we can degrow our economy and shrink the amount of resources that are used per person, per capita, or reduce the population as well. But again, doing it in a way that's careful of, the ethical quandaries that come up with that. So, here, what can we do on the individual level and community level? Because me becoming vegetarian does not stop climate change. So what can we do on a community level that also affects our consumption? And I promise this is the end. This is the last question I've got for you, and then we can get off because I know we're just past the hour. All right. Want to go in the breakout rooms again? Ooh. Let's go in breakout rooms. Right, you've all been invited to join a breakout room. Click join on your computers. Samson, Prachan, Vandalwe, Thu. Come on. Oh, there we go. Sorry to kick us out. I didn't realize that I hit that button so quick. So yep, now we're back in the main group, and everyone should be coming back in the next minute. All right, people starting to come back. Starting.
Hello.
Hello, welcome back,
Forces
everyone.
to come back.
We're missing 2 people still. Ogunaki.
Yeah, hello.
And who else? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, I guess we only have 5 people on the call now. Or 6. No, because I'm not in there. Am I? Yeah, there's one more person we're missing. Ogunaki. I don't know where he went. Anyways, so what did you guys discuss? You can all write in the chat so we can all speak at once. Isaac, did you come up with anything this time?
Yeah, we were talking about we cutting down the consumption rate. It was between myself and then Avaro, and then we were bringing out some ideas as to how to cut down the consumption rate in our countries. And then we were first of all talking about the population, that if we can reduce the population size, it can also help in reducing the consumption rate, because as the number of people in the country increases, they tend to consume a lot of resources. And then we're also talking about we going in for what we need, not going in for what we don't need at a particular time. You see, at times we go in for some stuff and then go in for excess, thinking that we have a lot to consume, so we can just abuse them. So I think we can cut down the consumption by going in for what we need, and then I also think that if we have better alternatives to some of these resources, we can use them rather than going in for these stuffs. For example, we talked about these energy saving bulbs and then other stuffs, which can help reduce the consumption rate. So, in all, that was what we tried to discuss and then bring out these ideas. But I was also thinking of recycling of some of the products, even though letting them to go to a waste, we can recycle them and then reuse them. It can also cut down the consumption rate. And that's my take on that.
Great, thank you. Ogunaki, what'd you talk about?
Actually, Sarah, there was no one to discuss with in my group, so I couldn't.
Oh, your partner didn't join. I'm sorry. What are your thoughts then? Why don't you share them with us now?
Okay, at first when we were discussing with myself, Isaac, and Mohammed, so we actually think we talked about Africa generally. We have a population increase, and it's really affecting the number of as in the amount of consumption rates that we are having, and it's actually affecting the economy drastically because of increase in population. But right now in Nigeria, I think we want to consider a lot that we allow each family not to have a certain number of children. So by so doing, maybe for the future purposes, they'll be able to control the population to manage or to bring the consumption rate to.
Thank you. And then Thandawelu?
to
Oh, I'm sorry, you're still going. You're welcome to keep talking. I'm sorry to cut you off. I thought you finished it. But yes, really thinking about resource consumption is important. Oh, Isaac, you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the population that we're trying to control the number of people. I think you were talking about you talked about the selection process in China. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. You see, for Ghana, population control is very difficult in Ghana due to ethnic beliefs and then some religious beliefs. If you raise population control in Ghana, they think it is their right to give. They have the right to produce the number of children that they want. You cannot
Oh,
control them. So yeah, so in our population control is very difficult in Ghana. Yep.
and again, I just want to reinforce that I don't think it should be a government policy, the number of children a family can have. I think that should definitely be from individual decisions, from, I choose to
And
have kids
you
or
know, many are ignorant. A lot of people are ignorant, and some people are even educated.
right. Because yeah, that that gets into a whole ethical quandary that I wouldn't you don't want to get into, because telling people they can't have abortions is can be problematic. Telling people they have to have abortions is definitely problematic. um Dandawelu, I'd like you to speak because you had some really interesting points. We were in a group together. I'm gonna unmute you. Unmute. Unmute. You're not unmuting.
Unmute myself.
There we go.
Sorry. Yes. What we said when we spoke with Sarah was sorry. Yes, was that it's all about individual choice. People make their choices at a personal level. People may decide to take action towards protecting the environment, towards being um, careful about their actions. At a community level, it's very difficult because you cannot dictate other people's actions. You can only suggest alternatives that are good for the environment, and you can provide incentives for people to choose options that are good for the environment and that will promote a safe environment for all, basically. What Something interesting that I mentioned was that China was introducing a a point system whereby you get 1,000 points initially, and if you keep doing good in your community, you recycle, you help other people, you return stuff that you found on the street that belongs to other people, then you get more points. But if maybe you do not repay your loan, you commit some sort of violence or you harass other people, then they take points away from your personal system. And the more points they take, the more conveniences they take away from you. For example, you cannot book a first class ticket out of the country. You cannot use first class in the trains. So basically, you have to maybe use a bus, which takes longer to get to where you're going, just because you committed a social crime. I may call it a social crime. Yeah. A system like that is very difficult because people have a lot of reasons why they do the things that they do. And Sarah was mentioning that every system or policy is very tricky because there are a lot of underlying principles and there are a lot of factors at play. So it's a very difficult one, but it was interesting for me to actually read about that system in China. Yeah.
Thank you. And the other thing that I mentioned in there was how we can use public policy to influence community level change. So, for example, nutrition policy is something where you can recommend a vegetarian or vegan diet. So, most countries put out like a nutrition guidelines of some sort. In the US, ours is heavily influenced by the corporations in agriculture industry who promote high levels of dairy and high levels of meat in that food pyramid. And so, you know, if my hand is my actually, do I have a plate down here? I don't. I guess my boyfriend cleaned up. I had a plate down here yet last night. Anyways, if this is a plate, we'll say, you know, this much is meat, this much of dairy, this much of vegetables, and this much of grains. It's like, well, we don't need that much. We can make do with less of meat or dairy. And so in Brazil, their nutrition guidelines say if you eat a vegetarian diet, it's better for your health and it's better for the environment because, you know, it's good for your heart to not eat being red meat and fats and dairy all the time. Many people are lactose intolerant and they can't process dairy. So putting dairy as a whole section on the on their plate or on their food pyramid or nutritional guidelines is problematic for that too. And so creating nutritional guidelines is a way that you can influence how community eats and how they consume resources for food. So that was one example of what we can do at a community level. So the last thing I want to say is kind of looping back to that boat is that we are all in the same canoe. We are all this is a picture of a Fijian canoe that was displayed at COP23 in Germany when the Fijian Prime Minister Frank Bainimarama, who was the president of COP that year, said, "We're all in the same canoe," which is a saying that they say in Fiji a lot to say, you know, we got to work together. We're all on the same team. If one of us goes down, we all go down because we're all in that same canoe. And so if we're all on the same planet, we all are going to suffer consequences if this planet collapses. And so, you know, we got to find where that swim line is on our canoe of our planet because we're all sitting up here on it. And so we all have to work together to steer our canoe in the right direction, to stay afloat, and make sure that we're reducing our consumption so that our canoe does sail forward to future generations. Thank you. Oh, wait, stop sharing my screen. There we go. So thank you all for joining this call. I know we went a little late, but we also started a little late. So thank you so much for your active participation. Thanks for testing out the breakout rooms. And we do have our next call on the 12th, so in just 2 days from now. And let me pull up the time. That will be our second part of the mini-series by guest speaker James Elsmore. He is an island expert. He has a master's degree in island studies, actually, which is pretty unique. And he works with renewable energy in islands in the Caribbean and Indian Ocean. So that will be on the 12th at 10 o'clock GMT. Again, thank you all so much and have a great rest of your day. If anyone has questions, feel free to send me a message. I'll stay on for a couple more minutes.